Welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge, if not destroy, media narratives. I'm Peter Lavelle. Well, in our first edition here, I'd like to take a look at an article published in Foreign Affairs of August of this year. It's written by an author that I know, and the title is "There is no Russian plot against America." The subtitle is "The Kremlin's electoral interference is all madness and no method." Well, after 3.5 years of Russiagate that has been clearly debunked, I suppose we should be pleased that such an article appears. So to discuss this here, we have George Szamuely. He is a author and commentator, and then we have Glenn Diesen. He is a professor and a commentator as well, and a prolific writer, I must say. So let me go to you first, George. I mean, I saying the obvious, okay, fine, but I find a number of problems in her argument in this very lengthy article. What was your takeaway from it?
Well, I quite agree with you. There are a number of problematic aspects. So while her attempt to say there is no Russian plot against America is perfectly reasonable, she nevertheless does subscribe to some of the cliches that have prevailed in analysis of Russia. So Russians are paranoid about America. Russians are, desperately trying to outmaneuver America because they're afraid that America's got ill intent towards them. And she doesn't, of course, question any of the claims of the Russiagaters. So she doesn't question that the Russians interfered in the 2016 election. She doesn't question that they intend to interfere in the 2020 election. She doesn't question that the Russia invaded Ukraine, Russia invaded Georgia. What was at least mildly original in her take is her assertion that the Russians are actually defensive, and that it's what we call aggression is actually a response to what they perceive as aggression toward them on the part of the United States and the West. And this, of course, she dismisses and says, that's, of course, paranoid thinking. But at least she does say that it's not that they have some intent to harm the United States. It's more that they are responding to what they see as a threat from the United States.
And you see a great deal of condescension against Russians. And for our viewers here, this is how Russian liberals interpret America and their own country. I think that's a really good example of it. Okay, Glenn, what I find really kind of surprising is that she didn't take for 1 second. I read the article twice. There's no quoting of James Clapper saying that the Russians are genetically prone to deceit and lying. I think those were the words here. And years and years of the most drumbeat language against Russia based on no facts whatsoever. She doesn't even consider that whatsoever. And that's what I found really interesting, is that one can make the argument is there is a misperception on both sides. That's a good first start to talk about. But essentially just saying, no, it's Russian paranoia. That's all this is. And you know what? They're quite inept, and they're bunglers, and they wouldn't be able to do it if they even tried. Okay, so don't even give them that credit. That's for me the undertone of her article. Go ahead, Glenn.
Well, I very much agree with what was said, because I think that most of the problems between the United States and Russia has been very structural. That is, the European order and indeed the world order was set up after the Cold War has very much put the US and Russia in direct conflict. Now, the main problem, though, is how this is analyzed, because there is this tendency, not just in the United States, but more broadly in the West, to subscribe to this idea or this myth of very central control. That is, every conflict, every tension is this, top-down Putin pulling strings. Indeed, not just everything that happens in Russia, but every election, every referendum across the world that doesn't go according to Washington's will are seen as being, this all-powerful Putin pulling the strings. And I thought that this article came out at a very interesting time, because only this month, in August of 2020, the US State Department released a report called Pillars of Russia's Disinformation and Propaganda Ecosystem. And the findings are rather absurd, but it's nonetheless a very fascinating reading, because it really gives an insight into how the so-called experts in Washington thinks. Because in this report, essentially every Russian politician, every academic, every media personality, everyone is part of this, what they refer to as an ecosystem of disinformation. So Zhirinovsky, Dugin, they're not even, not even friendly with the Kremlin. Nonetheless, they're all acting on behalf of Putin. And, everyone should read this document, because if you scroll down to page 6, there's my favorite quote where it's stating that, yes, a lot of the debates coming out of Russia, different narrative, competing perspectives. However, this is not the sign of an open society debating. No, these are all coming out of the Kremlin. They are even the contradictory one, and this is the genius of its propaganda, apparently. So is this absurdity that everything is connected, like everything is the central control, and that's it. We become so used to it that we kind of assume, well, the average reader or watcher of news, that Putin somehow controls everything in Russian society, and everything that happens which is in Russia's favor abroad is somehow, his personal order. So it is quite, I would recommend this report.
I've lived in Russia for 22 years. I wish it was so structured and so straightforward. It certainly is not. I mean, it's an amazingly decentralized place for the most part there. But George, this article tells us so much about the inability for introspection, because there's no inability to inspect and interrogate American foreign policy and to really try to put yourself in the shoes of the other side, and the other side in this case is Russia. I mean, when you hear Russians are genetically prone to lying and whatever, I mean, how are Russians supposed to react to that? All right, because what a lot of Russians will do, particularly in the political elite, they'll be echoing what Glenn just said here. They'll be looking at regime changes and sanctions and countries that are demonized. Look, Venezuela had its gold stolen from it illegally. No one batted an eye. Okay, I mean, it's the norms are for everyone else, but not for us, and particularly not for the Russians. Go ahead, George.
Yes, indeed. And that's the remarkable thing about her article, because she says, oh, the Russians have accused Hillary Clinton of interfering in the elections of 2011 and 2012. And then, but there's no real analysis of that. Well, did the Russians have a good reason to think that the United States was interfering?
Who was the ambassador? Who was the ambassador?
Yeah, right. Absolutely, exactly. People who blatantly, explicitly say that their aim is to get Putin out. I mean, that's their goal. They don't want Putin to be around. So, and she doesn't analyze any of the events that have led to the extreme disillusionment of Russians toward the United States and the West. So. There's no mention of the expansion of NATO. There's no mention of these the repeated military exercises on Russia's borders. There's no mention of U.S. withdrawal from the various arms control treaties. The ABM treaty, Open Skies treaty. No mention of any of that.
So and the attack on Nord Stream.
They're weird people.
And the attack on Nord Stream even goes into the economic realm also. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Glenn, this is, for me, was a very interesting exercise of how to try to explain its madness, but it's an explanation for Russia's madness. Again, it's a very condescending view of how Russians look at the outside world. And also, one of the things I find really interesting, this commentary, this running commentary, who the Kremlin prefers. That is just a patently stupid question to pose, because anyone in the Kremlin is just going to be how different will it get? Okay, because it's not going to be an improvement. Where's the deterioration they come from now? There is no expectation that there will be better relations. That train has left the station a long time ago, and these talking heads in the West, particularly that write in the foreign policy blob, just don't have a clue about that. Go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, that's the problem of looking through the domestic policies through, looking for international scapegoats. I mean, if Trump wins this election, it will be blamed on Russia. If he loses the election, he will blame the Chinese. So no matter what happens, it will be portrayed as being foreign meddling. But obviously, who would Russia prefer? It's very hard to say. But again, the assumption then would be whoever Russia prefers, it will intervene on behalf of. Now, again, the main problem with Russiagate has been the lack of evidence all the way. And again, this report I referred to as before, it has the same problem. There's no actual reference to any evidence, same as the British report on so-called Russian meddling. There's no actual evidence. It's just a lot of assumptions. And again, this central idea that you have this central control always by Putin. So you can mention whatever happens in Russia. If a journalist gets killed, for example, well, obviously it has to be traced back to the presidency. It's rather absurd if you would talk about any other country in this way. But as you mentioned, it is quite acceptable to say whatever you want about Russia. Indeed, this reference to Russians as being genetically, aggressive and all, no other. We can't talk about any other people in this manner. So,
George, let's finish it up here. One of the things, in looking back through this ridiculous charade called Russiagate, it shows an enormous amount of lack of self-confidence and weakness of the political system in the West, because there's this tendency to lash out at others for your own failings and your own inability to reflect upon your failures and your weaknesses, because this neoliberalism is like a cult. I mean, they're fervent believers in it, and it has to be true. It cannot fail. And to ensure that it doesn't fail, it will lash out at anyone else that questions it. And this is exactly what we've seen. Go ahead, George.
Yes. And in fact, I mean, we're now reaching the situation whereby the presidential election boils down to a fight between Putin and Xi. Which one of their favorite candidates is going to win? So, the American people apparently have no say in all of this. The next president will be decided either by Putin or by Xi. And it's an extraordinary phenomenon. And even more extraordinary is that we have this talk about it, particularly among the Democratic Party, about Russian interference in the election, and as if they are victims, when the only interference that we know of in the last election was that orchestrated by the Democratic Party, hiring a foreign national, hiring a senior figure in the British intelligence service, and so paid by the Democratic Party, and this was explicit interference in the election. And even so, somehow you have the Democrats, pretending that they are the victims of Russia, when in fact no evidence, as Glenn said, no evidence has been put forward of any.
I have a rhetorical question to end our chat here. I wonder how many mail-in ballots will be in Cyrillic or in Chinese. That will be very interesting to find out. All right, gentlemen, let's wrap it up here. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you will like, share, and subscribe to this channel, and a whole lot more ahead of us. I want to thank George and I want to thank Glenn. Thank you very much.